Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for the invitation to be here this morning and share some thoughts with you about parenting. I felt so at home driving in. I've met a number of you all that I've known from the past. Sue Pope from South MacArthur days. I worked there when I was first out of school. Steve Driggers I saw from Dallas Christian days. He and I went to school together, and driving in, I went to school with the Gibson family, and I didn't realize there were still Gibsons around. And there's one right down. I think I'm going to have to go in there just to relive old times. I went to school with all of those kids and that family, and it's good to meet you all and share some thoughts about parenting, grandparenting, or simply the topic of how we develop as children into adults. Parenting was something that started very early in my life. When I was 17 years old, my three nieces were dropped on my parents' doorstep to raise, 5, 4, and 3. So as an uncle, I became kind of a surrogate parent to those three girls. Raised an adopted daughter to adulthood and had a son and a daughter of my own. And you think you know something about raising kids from graduate degrees and all that stuff until you have your own or working with them, and then you realize you don't know anything at all. And so a lot of what I'm going to share to you will be somewhat book learning, but to a large degree experiential, both the things that work and the things that don't work. I will tell you this, raising my kids and now having grandsons has been the most profound experience of my life. I continue to enjoy it to this very day and recommend it highly to you. It's the biggest pain I've ever been through. It's expensive, and they don't pay you back. Every once in a while I get taken out to dinner, and that's a pretty good deal. I like the passage in the Gospel of Luke in the 2nd chapter. Luke is the gospel writer of family. Luke is the writer that gives us the family of Jesus. Particularly, Luke is the writer that gives us Mary and her experiences. And from the beginning of Luke, where she is a mother seated with God, being told she is going to give birth to the Messiah through the angel, Luke takes us all the way to the beginning of Acts, where she is presented sitting in the company of the first believers, and she moves from being the Mary, the mother of Jesus, to becoming Mary, the model believer. And it is a beautiful journey in the Gospel of Luke. There is my favorite paragraph in chapter 2 that says in verse 51, "Then he went down to Nazareth." This was after the temple incident. "He went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things," where? Yeah, in her heart. "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men." As Michael said, and he's exactly right, the Bible doesn't give us a prescription of what family is all about. It doesn't give us a model family that got it all done. In fact, he's exactly correct. Most of the families in the Bible we know much of anything about are absolutely a mess. They're just a piece of work when you look at them. But from this verse, it says, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. What I know is that Mary did some things right. There were some things that happened in that little village in Galilee that went well, because Jesus became the Messiah of love and compassion and tremendous courage. And you don't do that without the task of parenting being done well. So this morning, I can't point to book, chapter, and verse of what went on in that home, but I got an idea. Because I know if these things didn't happen, there would have been some problems on down the road regardless. And so I recommend to you a toolkit this morning of some basic principles of things that I've recommended to my students, I've recommended to my clients through the years, and I as a father tried to practice myself imperfectly. Number one, if we are going to build children that face the world that they have to face, we're going to need to build children that have an internal sense of self-worth. That internal sense of self-worth that says, I am valuable, I am important, I am capable, I am confident, I am able to face the challenges that this life will bring me. Self-esteem is not something that is an afterthought. It is foundational and core, because if an individual does not love themselves first, they're going to have an awful time loving other people, because love flows out of my internal sense of who I am. What I know is Mary did a great job of loving Jesus. Because of that, he had a good sense of self-worth, and because of that, he loved people, and multitudes flocked to him. Show me somebody that loves well, and I'll show you somebody that had good parents that instilled within them a sense of self-worth. And the text talks to us about that. The text builds self-esteem. Self-esteem is built by two elements, and if you're taking notes, if you got 1 point, this is the 1 point I want you to remember. It comes from a sense of security. I know that I'm loved, I'm cared about, that someone is permanently there for me and ain't going away. And it comes from significance. I know that I matter, that it means something that I walked this old earth and I was there. And when you take as a parent and you emphasize security, I really love my kids, and significance, I'm going to help them find what it is they're all about in this old world, you get dynamic self-esteem, and someone is solid and they can meet the challenges that life places in front of them. God promises this to us. He said, you are so important, you are so valuable. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. God so loved you that he gave Jesus. You don't get significance any greater than that. God sacrificed himself for you. And he promises, he says, neither height nor depth nor any living thing can separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ. You are forever loved, forever secure, forever held in God's hand. And God promises us from the get-go, he says, if you will come to me, I have an eternal sense of self-worth that I want to give to you. And the thing that's so devastating about life is, life will beat you up. Life will beat you up. It'll tell you nobody cares about you. It'll tell you that you're no good. It'll tell you you can't do it. It'll tell you you failed and you need to carry those failures with you forever. And can I politely say that's just bunk? It's just not right. So my first charge to you is that if you're a parent or you're a grandparent, you find the ways that you can demonstrate that love to those kids and those grandkids in ways that are meaningful to them, and you do it every single day as many times as you can. And you help them find ways that they can demonstrate that what they do in life is important and valuable, and it makes a difference. And you'll find that that core is then built, and they have something to build upon. Number two, the older I get, the more impressed I am with the incredible power of attachment. A mother finds out that she's expecting a child. And she carries that young child in her belly for 9 months and gives birth. And we know now from research studies that that child is bonded to that mother in the womb before that child is ever born. And she takes that child and she nurses that child and she soothes that child and she comforts that child. And that child may be born, but it is still emotionally and even psychologically attached to her. And God in his infinite wisdom knew that you launch a child first out of that attachment to that mother. And we just kind of fly on by that like that's a given, or that's not the mystery and the miracle that it really is. But you show me an individual that started life out with a dynamically loving, intense relationship with the mom, I'll show you somebody that's got a foundation they can build upon. I can prove it to you. I can prove it to you. I was born and placed in foster care when I was born in Burlington, Vermont. Spent the first almost year of my life in foster care, and then they didn't have any families in Burlington that wanted to adopt, so I was traded as a free agent down to Hartford, Connecticut, along with 2 future draft choices for the New England Patriots. And that's how, as a kid born into a Greek family, I became a Hebbard. And I went for almost 40 years of my life assuming that attachment was not a problem for me, only to discover that it really was. Really was. I was walking around with wounds that came from the fact that I never attached to my birth mother. So the counselor had to get some counseling, had to do some work on that. And what I've discovered in my own clinical practice, in my own work, is that when there is a break from sickness, from separation, from desertion, from giving up for whatever reason, when there's a break in that original bond that occurs, there may be work on down the road that needs to be done to restore that foundational relationship that was intended by God. Does that make sense? And it's not that anybody did the wrong thing. It's not that anybody was wrong. It wasn't that my birth mother gave me up and did the wrong thing. She absolutely did the right thing. I found her and we've had a relationship for 20 years. I talked with her this week. But what I understood was there was an internal core wound there that came very early on that had to be healed. Had to be healed. So those of us that spend the days and the months and the years nurturing, attaching, and letting our kids know, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, I will always be what? Yeah. My kids know day or night, 24/7, where you go, what you do, no matter how old you get, I'm still your what? I'm still your daddy. And that anchoring, you can't put a price tag on. Number 3, I wish parenting was cause-effect. I wish it were one way. If I could make one change in family and rewrite the rule, that would be it. This is the way Don wants it. I'm the dad. Do it. And then let it turn out the way that I intended. Right? Don't we all want that? Because I have the plan. And I've been down the road. And if you'll just listen to me, I can save you a bunch of this grief. But then I had children. And they had their own ideas. And they had their own plans. And they were stupid. Because parenting is a reciprocal relationship. You open the textbook of any parenting book at my university, chapter 1, and it's going to say parenting is a reciprocal relationship. In other words, what it says there is the parent impacts the child, but guess what? The child does what? Impacts the parent. My daughter, when she was 9 years old, decided she wanted to begin riding competitively. So we started taking lessons, and lessons turned into leasing a horse, which turned into buying a horse, which turned into us buying multiple horses, which turned into horse shows. She ended up being, in Oklahoma, the state champion 6 times in English hunter jumper. I bought her a 1,400-pound quarter horse from the Hot Rodder Jet Set bloodline, which is just one of the best bloodlines in the world. This horse was absolutely just the safest horse you could get. I mean, you could have walked him into my living room, stood Colonel right there, said, in fact, he thought he was a human. Just stood him right there and said, be still, and he was fine. Because I thought, if my daughter's going to do this, we're going to be as safe as we possibly can. Itty bitty thing. He was 1,400 pounds, she weighed about 65. And she was absolutely strongest-willed kid, but very, very quiet. They were warming up one day before lessons, indoor arena, all the girls were in there, and he was just at a slow trot. And he was just absolutely so safe. He accidentally tripped. And as he tripped, he went down on his front legs, went down on his front knees. And as he did, he flipped her over his left shoulder. She ended up pinned underneath his knee, her throat under his knee, her body under the rest of his leg. And she was trapped under there. Horses are instinctive animals. He's down on his knees. He's going to pop up to save himself. And if he had, he would have crushed her. This horse that I spent boatloads of money on throws this right leg out and braces himself, and as he does, he pitches her out to one side and presses up with this leg. When he does, he rips all of those muscles out of that shoulder. It'd be like you stepping on your leg and ripping your hamstring out on purpose. When I got to the arena, she was laying down face up in the dirt. We did about 90 miles per hour in the back of an EMT vehicle all the way down to the trauma unit at the OU Medical Center. And when we wheeled into the trauma room, there were 15 doctors and nurses underneath the big lights, and there was a chaplain waiting for me. She was trauma level 3. They assumed she had internal injuries from throat to her knees. And I'm sitting in the waiting room thinking, the worst. It was the worst 2 hours of my life. The doctor walks out, and I'm just absolutely losing it. And he says, she's black and blue from her chin to her knees, but we can't find anything wrong. And we walked out the next day, out to the parking lot, and took her home. And on the way, I am thinking, okay, we're going to sell the horse, we're going to buy something else, or we're going to get a suit of armor for you to jump in. You're going to live your life in Kevlar. You're never coming out of your room again, blah, 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 blah. I'm running down all the security list, right? She looks at me and she says, Dad, don't start with me. I'm going back, I'm riding Colonel, I'm going to jump, and that's the end of it. Well, shoot. And she did. And she did. Did I impact her as a father? Sure. She's got my nose and my ears, and she's never forgiven me for that. But did she impact me? Oh, yeah. I watched her jump yesterday. She's 27 years old. And it's the greatest thing in the world. But it was the most painful thing in the world. And that's what we do as parents. We realize this is an interaction. And sometimes we lead, and sometimes they lead, and sometimes we laugh, and sometimes we cry, and that's just what it is. Am I right? Yeah. And that's what kills us. That's the aging process. It's children, it's not cellular. We realize we want them to have faith. We want them to have values. We want them to believe in the things that are absolutely so vitally important. And people come to me and they say, how do we pass on our faith? How do we pass on our values? How do we pass on the things that are so important to us, to our children and our grandchildren? And let me tell you the secret. Let me tell you the secret I've discovered. And it's not a book, it's not a curriculum, it's not some formula that's magic. It is stories. It is stories. Our children hear and remember and repeat the stories that we tell them and the stories from the life that they live with us. When I was growing up in Hartford, Vince Lombardi was the head coach for the Green Bay Packers, and that was the team we all followed up there. And then we moved to Dallas, and I converted to being a Cowboys fan, and then I'll go to heaven. But we were doing pee-wee football up in Hartford in the early years for the first time. They never had leagues before. And back then, they had pee-wee, midget, and pony league. And it wasn't done by age, it was done by weight. And so you had weigh-in, and they assigned you to pee-wee, midget, or pony. And I decided I wanted to play football. And I went for weigh-in. And people don't believe me nowadays, and they think I'm lying, but I was the fat kid in class. I was chubby all the way through junior high school, and when I went to weigh in, all my friends were pee-wee, because I was in about the 4th or 5th grade, I guess. I weighed in, and I was so heavy, they put me in the next league up. They put me in the midget league, and they made me a linebacker. And I have this vivid memory of being in the practice field, and I'm outside linebacker. I come in, I fill the hole, and the fullback is running at me just like this. I'm standing straight up, and I weighed as much as he did, but I came to his belt buckle. And I hit him at the belt buckle, and he caved over me like this. My dad, bless his heart, was sitting in his Chevy Impala 4-door on the sidelines watching this disaster. And my parents had been giving me drum lessons for years and years and years. And I remember coming off the practice field, my dad put the key into the trunk, popped it, lifted it up, and inside was a blue sparkle Ludwig drum set. And he looked at me and he said, "Why don't we have you play drums until your height catches up with your weight?" Okay. But you think about it. My dad grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. He was a CPA, and he thought Glenn Miller was hot stuff. And he imported a drum set to his house for 15 years. I know the man's in heaven just for doing that. But that taught me an awful lot about what it means to be a father. He could have preached at me all kinds of things, but he never did. He lived it in front of me. And that's what I'm saying to you this morning. The stories that you tell your kids, the experiences that you live out with them, the things that you do together, that's what builds those core values. And then when they have questions, then when they're stuck, then when they don't know what to do, they'll text you. And they may answer you and they may not. But at least they're still coming in there and they're still trying. We don't understand, and there's no guarantees to how this stuff is ever going to turn out. Oh, I wish there was. I really wish there was. I wish when they had given me Jared and Haley at Presbyterian over in Dallas, it had come with one, an instruction manual, and two, an end product guarantee. This is how this thing's going to turn out. This is what it's going to look like. And there you go. And Don, you just have to go through A, B, and C to get there. And it just doesn't work that way. There are no guarantees. We just don't know. There's a mystery piece to this because they have a genetic piece that spans generations. They make their own decisions. They walk it out. And sometimes we impact that, and sometimes we fly alongside of that. When my son was growing up, he was an extrovert. We talked about that in the Bible class hour. He was a non-competitive extrovert, which means when we signed him up for little pee-wee soccer, You know, they're this tall and the ball's about half as big as they are, and they're going down the field in a pack with the ball in the middle. And he was so extroverted and friendly, he never kicked the ball. He wasn't competitive. He would just run up and down the field chatting with other members of the team. And he would take their attention off of the ball, and we always won. Send Jared out there. He'll be chatting with everybody. I had a plan for him. My plan was he gets into junior high and starts playing what? Football. Oh yeah, I heard it over there. Yeah, we're going to learn discipline. We're going to learn to get tough. We're going to work out. You know, I'd want him to work out with me, and let's go run together. And let's, you know, I even hired Jared Kaihello, who is an ex-NFL fullback, to, you know, work out with us one off season. He gets out into 8th grade football up in Edmond, and he's out maybe for 3 or 4 weeks. And he's going to be a lineman. He's going to be a guard, you know, and do this number. So he comes into me one night. I'll never forget it. He comes into me one night, and he's just absolutely shaking. And he's been drumming his whole life with me, but he's going to do competitive sports. And he comes in one night and he says, Dad, I just don't want to do this football thing. It ain't me. I'm not going to do it. And I had to decide, okay, am I going to force him into a mold, or I'm going to step back? And he said, I want to go back to playing in band. I want to go back to playing drums. And I thought, okay, do I force this thing, or am I going to step back and let him be who he is, even though it's not fitting my what? My plan. My plan. Four years ago, he called me on the phone. He was up in Edmond, and he said to me, I'm going to come down to Dallas. I want to attend college. I want to get my degree, and then I'm going to apply for a major police force. I want to be a cop. And I said, you're going to get killed. He said, no, you don't understand. I've been dreaming about this for 5 years. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you. And I said, no, you're not. I said, this is a bad idea. In fact, the whole family got together and told him, this is a bad idea. You're going to get killed. He came down. He went to school. He got his grades. He got in shape. 2,300 people applied to the Fort Worth Police Department for a class that accepted 23. Took him 9 months, and he got in. He was in training for 9 months. They'd put him in class in the mornings downtown, and they would be in class in their suits. And if somebody said something wrong or did something wrong, they'd haul them out down by the river, and they've got big dikes that go up and down, and they'd have to bear claw in their suits up and down the dikes. Okay? These are your police officers. One 48-hour period. We'd get together on Friday nights after he'd survived another week and have pizza. One 48-hour period of time, they gassed him, they tasered him, they pepper sprayed him, and they gassed him again. Because they did everything on his tool belt except shoot him. And they shoot him with fake bullets, but they didn't do it that week. He made it through. We had dinner this week. He has just been accepted into the tactical unit of the Fort Worth Police Department. He's zero tolerance. He's going to, you know these guys that get all geared up in the headgear and they stand at the doors and they break them through and go serve warrants and break down drug dealer stuff? That's what he's going to do. He goes to work with an AR-15, a shotgun, a 9mm, and a backup weapon, and 250 rounds of ammo, and he thinks it's fun. Okay, here's my question. Did I have the plan? No. He can look at me. In fact, we were at dinner Tuesday night, and he looked at me and he said, "This is a mess, isn't it?" He said, who ever thought the kid that was scared to death of football would end up going through doors arresting bad guys? My point to you is very, very simple. As a parent, sometimes we just don't know. And we do the best we can, and then we turn loose of it and give it over to God and say, by your grace, let this thing work out. I'm going to be here, I'm going to be praying, and I'm going to do the best that I can for you. Does that make sense? And those of you that are in that position right now, where you're watching a kid out there floundering, or out there making some of those bad decisions, or not finding their way, or not going according to the plan, my security to you about that, my reinforcement to you about that is, the whole story ain't written yet. You never know. And there still is time. And you just satellite around that thing, and you realize they and God are at work. And that's tough to do. It is a blessing and a privilege, a mystery that we have to confront. Sometimes, I'll say a word, we've been talking about how to do parenting. To conclude this morning, let me say a word about being a parent. Our children may lay in our laps as parents and grandparents work that we need to do, work that we need to look at and do. I told you early on I was adopted. Jared and Haley were the first two human beings I ever saw in the world that were biologically related to me. I'd never seen another family member before my kids. And I was so unbelievably overprotective of them, it was amazing. I went out immediately and bought the biggest, shiniest, toughest Suburban I could find. Put cattle guards on it so no one's going to touch my kids, because these are the only two. I called them my first family, because that was my attachment stuff. That was my fear of separation. And God, in His infinite sense of humor, gave me a kid that jumps horses and another one that does SWAT. And dumped it at me and said, Don, you need to work on your issues of being a bit overprotective. Do I have to do my work? Yes, I do. So it is then that they had to grow up, but their dad had to grow up too. Amazing. Amazing. My message to you this morning is a simple one. It is, our children present us with the most marvelous work to raise them. And perhaps there will be a blessing as we grow in that process as well. Thank you for letting me be part of your morning this morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I hope this message has been helpful to you in some way. We're going to lead a song of encouragement. If you have needs this morning in any way that are spiritual, the elders and the ministers here at this church are great people. Got to spend some time with them this morning. Encourage you to come, ask for prayers or whatever you may need. Let's stand together and sing.